Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. If this is your first time, welcome back if you've been before. Lovely to have you either way. My name's Kelly and on this channel we talk books. Today I am filming a wrap up of all of the books that I read in the month of May. I read 4 books in total in May, so we're going to have a chat about those now. 1 non-fiction, 2 fiction, 1 poetry. Yeah, it was a bit of a diverse sort of a month in terms of the books that I have read. So yeah, let's get into it. The first book that I picked up and finished, I don't know if it was the first book I picked up, but definitely the first book I finished in the month of May was Unmasking Autism by Dr. Devon Price. And the tagline is The Power of Embracing Our Hidden Neurodiversity. This, as you can see, I have significantly tabbed it and made a lot of notes. I annotated this book. I started into it and I probably got maybe 2 chapters in, and then I was like, I need to just annotate this. And I am not an annotator. In fact, I would go so far as to say I have never taken a highlighter to a book. I don't know what it is, whether it's just that sort of the idea of if I eventually want to pass this book on, it's got all my annotations in it, so it probably can't be, donated or sold or whatever down the track. And in this book, I realized as I started to get into it that I am keeping this book. This is a book I'm going to refer to because I got so much out of it. And so I'm glad that I definitely did do that because it's going to make it a lot easier for me to refer back to and to read again and again, but perhaps in sections as opposed to from cover to cover. So this is a book that is all about autism, as you can probably guess from the title. And it's talking about the ways in which autistic people feel the need to mask, and that essentially it's not even something that most autistic people would be making conscious decisions about in terms of I'm going to mask now because, and by masking he's referring to the kinds of things that an autistic person will do to kind of try to cover over the fact that they're autistic. So it could be to do with the way that an autistic person communicates. It could be to do with, a particular social situation, et cetera, and sort of covering over of the natural inclination in terms of communication and sort of just being in the world, interaction, and so on. This felt to me like really essential reading if you are an autistic person, and also if you love or know an autistic person, because the way that Dr. Price kind of fleshes out the idea of what it means to mask, also kind of explanations of kind of how autism works at the beginning, and then also lots and lots of anecdotal, examples of the ways in which people have found themselves to be masking, and sort of the process of unmasking so that you are communicating the way that your brain and body kind of naturally want you to, I think is sort of a goal that an autistic person might be working towards. So it felt really, really essential in that way. I also really liked that it was quite intersectional, in my opinion. However, I have read other people reviewing it, especially autistic people of color who have reviewed this and felt that some of that intersectionality, especially when it pertained to people of color, felt a little tacked on to them, and that it wasn't sort of deep enough. Like there was an acknowledgement that unmasking is perhaps can be dangerous for an autistic person of color, and you know, as you get into the book, you can see why that would be the case. However, those people who are that demographic, who have that intersectionality, are reading this book and feeling like there's not really, beyond that acknowledgement, there isn't really an exploration of that. So where I saw intersectionality, I was thinking about particularly the intersectionality of disability, i.e. autism in this case, and being a queer person. So that intersectionality was very, very well explored, and that is partly because Dr. Price is a queer person and is autistic. So take my review with a grain of salt. There are other people who are saying that they did not feel that that was the case. However, for me, in reading it, I ended up giving this 5 stars. So this was an amazing book, and I would highly recommend it if you are an autistic person, if you know and or love an autistic person, because I think you will get a lot out of it, as I did. So with those caveats as explained. So yeah, and the fact that I felt compelled to annotate this book, I think, says it all, as somebody who does not annotate books. The call number for this one is 616.8588. So if you are joining us for the Dewey Decimal Nonfiction Reading Challenge this year, this could be the one that you might choose for the 600s category, and it was certainly my one. So this is my 600s. So that was book number 1. The second book that I finished in the month of May was Spare by Prince Harry, another nonfiction. So, I think I characterized this as fiction at the beginning of the introduction to this, but it wasn't. It wasn't. This is nonfiction. This is a memoir. So, have I written the call number down? Yes, I have. 920 is what it is. So this is, of course, the biography or autobiography of Prince Harry, written in exile. I don't know if that's a fair characterization of his current living situation. Written following on from moving outside of the UK. So in terms of this as a memoir, so I don't really want to discuss the kind of intricacies of his life. I have heard people criticizing this book in terms of him sort of coming across as very privileged. And I mean, he is very privileged. So that wouldn't have surprised me if that were the case. And there obviously were times in here where you look at his life and you're like, wow, you had so much, and just sort of the life that he was able to lead because of his status as a prince. However, I did not get that. I did not get the impression of unchecked privilege that other people have implied when they've been reviewing this book. What I will say in terms of a negative about this book is that it's a little bit long-winded in the middle, especially where he's talking about his military service, because it just sort of felt overly technical. So he kind of he explained a lot of things that went on at that time in his life, and that it just felt like it went on for a little bit too much. And I would imagine that very few people are reading this memoir because they want to read about his military service. I'd be surprised if that were the case. I think people are much more interested in his personal life and, what caused him to make the decision to move away from the UK, and like how that came to be, how that decision came to be, as well as, of course, how he came to meet his wife, how he, came to the place that he is right now in the world. And those were definitely the more interesting sections of this book, where he sort of talks about the evolution of him as him in the media, also talking about the evolution of his relationship with his wife and his growing family. So yeah, I think overall this was quite a good book. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I enjoyed this as a memoir. I think it was actually quite well written. I have heard that he had a ghostwriter involved in the process of putting this together. And I think that was a good move because it actually comes across as being quite well written. It could have done with a bit more editing, especially in those sections about his military service. But otherwise, this was a really, really good a good memoir. I do, after reading this, I mean, I would say quite a sympathetic sort of person anyway. You know, for a person who lost their mother in tragic circumstances, for a person who has certainly been demonized in the media, I do feel sympathy for him. And I think reading this book kind of led me to continue feeling that. And I was gutted for the racism and the ill treatment that his wife Meghan Markle received in the press. I don't follow the news that much really because it's too much for me and it leads to me feeling really, really anxious. So I missed a lot of that. I'm in Australia. I'm not in the UK. So I, sort of marginally was aware of it, but, I certainly didn't understand the extent of it. And I have a better understanding of that now after having read this book. And it's horrible. Like, it's awful that happened to their family, regardless of your politics and your, your stance on the royal family existing, your stance on Meghan Markle as a person. She's a human, he's a human, so it's just awful to hear how difficult people's lives are so unnecessarily because people can't connect with humanity, with other humans. That makes me really sad. So that was really gutting in reading this book. But yeah, it was a well-written memoir. It took me far too long to get to it, given that I bought it quite soon after it was released and spent far too much money on it. So I will now probably be passing this on so that somebody else who wanted to read it can get it at a much cheaper price than I paid for it, that's for sure. So that is Spare by Prince Harry. The third book that I read is a book that I have been wanting to get to for such a long time, and it was recently longlisted for the I was going to say the Stella Prize, but it's not the Stella Prize. It is the Miles Franklin Literary Award, which is, if you have been following me for a while, you will know that last year I read all of the long-listed books from the Miles Franklin Award, which is a big literary prize here in Australia. So I already owned a copy of this book, and I also know the author of the book. So that is the other reason I'm really excited about this. And that book and that author is Chai Time at Cinnamon Gardens by Shankari Chandran. So I have spoken about her before on my channel. She is the mother of a student that I taught about 5 years ago, so like a while ago now. But she is a lovely person in person, but also, it turns out, a really good writer. I really enjoyed this book. This was such a good read. Again, you can take this with a grain of salt given that I know the person who wrote it, but I gave it 5 stars. And it was certainly a surprise to me that I enjoyed it so much, which sounds really rude, I'm sure, but I mean it in the sense of I think I was a bit anxious that I wasn't going to love this, given my connection with the author. So when I did love it, I was very, very excited and very, very happy for her because this is such an interesting book. Now, I will grant you that looking at the cover of this book, you would not necessarily expect the book that you actually read. To me, this cover, as gorgeous as it is, kind of looks like it's going to be so the Cinnamon Gardens is an old people's home, a retirement home. So I think when I saw that that was the case and I read that in the blurb, I was thinking this is going to be a sort of light, maybe not fluffy exactly, but like, you know, maybe hard hitting, maybe, you know, some lovely stories will be told as part of this, you know, sort of light-hearted kind of book. And that's sort of the impression that I got from the cover. That is not the book. That is not the book that I read. Not at all. So it doesn't indicate, this cover does not indicate the depth of this story, and also the breadth of it as well. Like what it covers is so surprising, you know, if you're just purely looking at this as a cover buy. So I can highly recommend it. So I think that she's done a brilliant job of exploring really complex characters. Even the, you know, quote unquote baddies in this book have depth and have backstory and have, you know, you can still feel sympathy for a character that's making bad choices in this book because of the sort of 3D nature of the characterization that she's managed to get in this book. They felt really real and very compelling. I bawled, I cried when I finished reading this book. Sort of some of the culminating kind of action towards the end of the book, I was crying, like proper crying because I felt so connected to these characters. So I know this is a very glowing review, a very glowing rating of 5 stars. And you can, as I said, take that with a grain of salt, knowing I do have a connection to the author. However, I would really encourage you to find yourself a copy of Chai Time at Cinnamon Gardens because you will not be disappointed. This book explores the so many different things. So, but it is looking at the history and politics of Sri Lanka. It is looking at what it means to grow old, and it's looking at family. It's looking at the connections that people have, the choices that they make, the way that a person's character develops as it's tested, the way that if you are a person who has had horrible things happen to you, there's no inevitability about who you become, as you know, as your life goes on after those horrible things. You still have choice, you still have agency, you still can be a person who makes a difference and who is good and kind. So, you know, there was a lot to pull out of this book. I'm not tearing up exactly, but I can feel like prickles behind my eyes just discussing this book. I loved it. I really, really loved it. So I hope that if you choose to pick it up based on my recommendation, that you too will love it, because I thought it was brilliant. So definitely try and get your hands on this one if you can. All right. And the last book that I read in the month of May was a poetry collection. The poetry collection is called Inside My Mother by Cobby Eckermann. Cobby Eckermann is an Australian poet who is an Aboriginal First Nations person. So she writes from that perspective. A lot of her poetry touches on her experience as an Aboriginal person, and as an Aboriginal woman specifically. So, you know, if that's something that you're interested in reading about, this is definitely worthwhile looking for. This collection came out in 2015, and I think when I first started reading it, so the first section of poems, I was, if I'm honest, a little bit underwhelmed by the poetry, because I don't know, it's hard to sort of say exactly why. It just sort of felt like it was stuff I'd seen before. And maybe that's because it's from 2015. Like this is not a new collection. And it didn't sort of seem to have anything new to say. However, moving into as sort of towards the end of the first section, because it's divided up into, I think, maybe 4 sections, where there's, I don't know, about 15 poems in each section. So towards the end of that first section, there were some really great poems, and then sections 2 and 3 also had really great poems. Section 4 kind of tapered off a little bit, but it was still pretty decent. So yeah, the poems are short. There's only a few that go over more than 1 page. Most of the poems are, you sort of have either most of the page or a small amount of the page. So it's a quick collection to get through. I ended up giving this 3.25 stars. As I said, I wasn't sure about it at the beginning. It picked up though. So yeah, I think it is definitely worthwhile. There is a line that I'm going to read out to you that really kind of captured my imagination. It's from a poem called Lake Air, and it starts by saying, "We float our churches down the river, and you will not know, you do not see our religion." And that image of floating a church down the river really kind of I think gives a good indication of, the kinds of things that poetry can do by giving you this jarring kind of metaphor, it is a metaphor, I guess, but like a jarring kind of image that makes you kind of think. That's the kind of poetry I really like, where it sort of gives you something to kind of grasp a hold of, but also to then kind of think about what the implications of that imagery is. So yeah, those were the poems that I think succeeded really well, were the ones that really kind of captured that and gave you, the reader, something to kind of grasp a hold of. Some very kind of personal poems as well that were really good too. I think some of the more political poems didn't work as well, in my opinion. And I was kind of thinking about this and wondering if part of the reason for that is that this is not a new collection. So it's a collection from 2015. So therefore, the way that we talk about things, those political things, has moved on a little bit, not so much in content, but those conversations are a lot more common now. And I don't know that those poems, reading them today in 2023, sort of gives the same impact it might have in 2015. So that's potentially an issue of the timing of me reading this collection as opposed to the poems themselves. But I felt like those more personal poems, and also the ones where, she's kind of exploring connection to country, and she's exploring her connection to her family and generations past, are the ones that I think succeed the most in this collection. I would still recommend picking it up, or at least kind of looking into her poetry if you're not a whole poetry collection kind of reader, but more like to dip in and out of poetry. If you come across some poems by her, I would say give them a go and see what you think. So that is my month of May. 4 books. I'm pleased with this amount of books because my end goal of the year, which is the same as the goal that I've been setting for the last couple of years, is to read 52 books by the end of the year. So roughly, if I'm reading about 4 per month, that's going to get me there. I'm already ahead of target by about 4, so I've read 26. This is book number 26 that I've finished for the year. So yeah, I'm on track. I'm happy with that. And I'm happy with what I've read this month. There was nothing bad. That was pretty good. So I had 2 5-star books, a 4-star book, and a 3.25 stars. That's a pretty decent month of reading. So I'm really, really pleased with that. Let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these books and have any thoughts to share. I would be interested to hear your opinions about these things. Did you agree, disagree? Are you keen to pick up any of these after hearing my review? I'd love to hear all about it down in the comments, so please feel free to chat with me down there. All right, thanks for watching, guys, and I will catch you on the next one. Bye.